In what seemed like just barely a couple of weeks ago, I watched Ozzy Osbourne, as did hundreds of thousands of people probably around the world, and over 40,000 people in the Aston Villa ground. We watched Ozzy sing and struggle to get through two sets, one of his own music and one with Black Sabbath. And when I use the word struggle, the courage he showed and the sound of his voice and how he came across, you could see for the cameras as it panned across the grounds just how moved people were. And there were people there from all ages, not just blokes in their 60s, people from all around the world, all nationalities, male, female, I say all ages, absolutely entranced by watching this spectacular day that celebrated Ozzy Osbourne, the Back to the Beginning gig, obviously ending with Black Sabbath. And there was a moment in that before Ozzy sang Mama, I'm Coming Home, where he said you don't know what it's like, how he'd been out of action and he'd been ill and how much it felt for him to be there. And people sang those lines to help him. And you could see he almost thought at some point he was going to get up. He was trying so hard to do that. And there'd been lots of talk about whether he was going to make it or not. But he did. And it was a tremendous success. And it raised more money for charity than any other concert, I think, ever. But literally just a couple of weeks later, the news has now broken that Ozzy Osbourne has sadly passed away. And the news is obviously only just breaking. And I think at first a lot of people didn't know whether it was true or not. And I've talked a lot about Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath on this channel. And so although perhaps this is something I might have expected to do, I've tried to, I'm just going to try and talk about what it means to me, because this is a tribute video. But the tribute isn't necessarily all from me. The tribute is for you. All of you watching this, where Ozzy Osbourne meant a lot to you. It's obviously dedicated to Sharon and the family, all Ozzy's children. But specifically for you watching this, because I imagine that a lot of you, wherever you are in the world, you could be anywhere, couldn't you? You could be watching this from Brazil or New Zealand, but you'll all be feeling the same. You could be someone who's in your teens and you've only just discovered Ozzy Osbourne and Black Sabbath. Maybe you watched the live stream and you're just trying to catch up. Maybe you bought your first Black Sabbath album just a couple of weeks ago. Maybe you were there before they even recorded Paranoid. Maybe you saw them when they were Earth. Maybe you heard about them from your mum or dad's record collection, and maybe they'd sadly passed away, and you've discovered what your mum and dad were really into. Maybe you're just someone who, at any point in time, bumped into Ozzy Osbourne and his music. And I've tried to think about how you're all feeling, because everyone's trying to. It's too early to say come to terms with it. Everyone will be in shock, because it's a figure like Ozzy Osbourne. You just have a feeling that they're always there. And although we all knew that Ozzy Osbourne was really poorly with Parkinson's and lots of other things that happened to him, you just felt that he'd pull through. He was going to be around for a bit longer. And we saw how much he struggled to do that concert. But one thing about Ozzy, he loves his fans. He loved his fans. You know, he'd end it every time I saw him live. It was always "God bless you all" at the end. I think he appreciated his fans more than anybody. I know lots of people who knew him personally, and everyone would say the same thing. Now, I'm not going to just paint a picture and say he was a perfect human being, because he was a human being. So, you know, through his life, he'd obviously had some missteps and stuff. But this is about celebrating not just who he was, but what he's left behind and what he means to such a lot of people. It's easier for me, and maybe for those of you who are new to Ozzy Osbourne, because I always struggle over this. I don't want to come across as someone, oh, because I was there or something, because I wasn't. Although I'm, you know, slightly older than if you're in your 20s. There were people obviously who probably saw them when they were like, you know, doing their jazz blues stuff, a band called Earth. So, but it is probably useful to think when I first bumped into Ozzy Osbourne, and I don't mean personally, the music. I was at school. I was probably 12 or 13, listening to Slade, T-Rex, Sweet, that kind of thing. Probably just moving into the big kids' music, Zeppelin and Purple and stuff. And there was and of course at the, you know, the school discos, I'd heard Paranoid, which was always played at the end with Black Knight by Deep Purple, and I eventually got a copy of that. But again, thinking back to this period in time, I wasn't buying music papers or anything, and so I didn't know what they looked like. It's not like now when you just go onto social media and look up pictures and stuff. I hadn't got a clue. And so the first time I saw them, because I did buy the first Black Sabbath album, but there's no pictures of them in that, was Paranoid. And there's this picture here of, wrong side, of Ozzy, standing slightly apart from the others. Some people saw this as a portent that one day he would go solo. I don't know. But standing there looking with his hands on his hips, giant crucifix, I just thought it looked really cool. And I listened to that album over and over again, and I've spoken about it lots of times. And I do feel when I listen to, because I've been listening to the album Paranoid a lot. In fact, my youngest son Lee has just bought his first Black Sabbath album. He's one of those people I spoke to at the very start of this, and he bought Paranoid. I think that tracks like War Pigs and Geezer's very reflective and intuitive lyrics makes that song the anthem of today, the anthem of any generation, really, with what's going on in the world. There was a kind of insightfulness in Sabbath's vision and the music that they created that is timeless. And if you are from Birmingham, which is where I originate from, I've said this before, that the sounds of the factories, especially Halliday's drop forgings near Aston, you could almost hear Black Sabbath in the machines, in the giant hammers coming down against steel. You could almost feel the rhythm of Bill Ward's drum kit, without a doubt. And then the next time, as my journey continued, the fact that Black Sabbath Volume 4, because again on Master Reality there's a poster, but it was this, because this is interesting. Can you imagine if Led Zeppelin or Deep Purple would have stuck a picture of their lead vocalist on the front cover and no one else? Can't, can you? But there was something about Ozzy very early on that made him different. And this picture is also one of my favourite images from Volume 4. And people loved Ozzy. As it's hard to explain in the 70s in Birmingham, is that, yeah, you know, there were, you know, you could say that people were into, like, you know, the kind of pop rock stuff we call T-Rex, Slade, whatever, and you could say the girls were into basically Rollers and the Osmonds. But that wasn't the case, because once you got to like 15 or 16, it was about equal. You know, both sexes liked Black Sabbath, but there was one person that everyone kind of moved towards, and it was Ozzy Osbourne. It was Ozzy. That was the name that people scribbled on their exercise books at school or onto the desks. Whether for me, it was kind of something about him. Again, remember, we've only seen a few interviews in music press. We don't see him on the telly. We can't watch little snippets on social media. There isn't any Osbourne show at this point. It's just a feeling from listening to the songs and the way he expresses himself. There was a kind of vulnerability to Ozzy where you could actually almost see yourself within him. You heard these stories about if it hadn't been for Sabbath, he'd have been in prison, and he'd worked in a slaughterhouse and all this. And think, well, I hadn't done that, but I worked in really, really terrible factories with pretty bad people. I was kind of, as some of you know from my other videos, I was bullied when I made my first job, and school was really a scary place in the 70s. But there were certain things that kept your head above water, and Black Sabbath was one of those. You could say, well, what about the other bands, like the other ones in that kind of group, Zeppelin and Purple? Of course, as you know, Purple, one of my favourites. But no, there was something about Sabbath that were like, this will sound really strange, but there was almost something protective about listening to Black Sabbath and how it felt when you hummed the songs in your head when you walked around anywhere that you didn't really want to be, which in my case was school or work later on. There was something about, because again, when I say singing a Black Sabbath song or humming one, it's because there wasn't any way of sticking your earbuds in at this point, because they hadn't been invented. So you would listen to a song over and over again until you literally absorbed the lyrics, the bass lines, the vocal phrasing from Ozzy, the guitar licks, the riffs, and then you would play it back when you needed it, like a talisman, like a shield, with whatever you were doing. And the other thing to say is that all through my early teens and then teens and 20s and 30s, and I can keep going to where I am now, Sabbath were a constant. They were always there. So, wherever, when I got to the point when I was going to pubs or being in bands or watching bands, or Sabbath were part of that background. They were part of the fabric. I remember, I can't remember which band I was with actually, and we went to a recording studio called The Barn to do a demo, and there was all these white Marshall cabinets and amps. And I thought, God, who are those for? And the guy there said, oh, that's for Ozzy. That's for Ozzy. He's rehearsing for Blizzard of Oz. And that obviously would have been Randy Rhoads. And so Sabbath was big news, no matter what kind of music you were into, what kind of band you were watching or whatever. Whatever Black Sabbath were doing was news. And every time a Sabbath album was released, it was big news, and everyone went to get it. And as I said before, whether it was Textile Ecstasy or being in Bogarts, and I'd gone up there for a few beers and couldn't understand why some of my mates were like getting there, and they said, oh, you missed Black Sabbath on Top of the Pops doing Never Say Die. I go, Black Sabbath on Top of the Pops. It was huge news. And then, of course, I saw them in 1978, another one of my favourite pictures of Ozzy is that one from the 1978 World Tour, where they found themselves up against the rather frisky Van Halen. But again, Ozzy then moved on. Sabbath reinvented themselves, and we all thought, well, what's Ozzy going to do? And you know what? People genuinely were concerned about Ozzy and what he was going to do next. I think even for Black Sabbath, they thought, well, we're just going to get a new singer. Deep Purple have done that. I mean, what's the big deal? But it was a big deal because Ozzy was so loved. And obviously, I think the thing is, I have a very blinkered view because I came from Birmingham at this point. But people in the States and Australia and Europe also felt similarly towards the guy. And I saw Blizzard of Oz at the Birmingham Road in 1980 with Randy Rhoads, and it was spectacular. And I think Ozzy never got over the fact that Randy Rhoads died in that accident. I think that probably mortally wounded him on some level, because I think he'd found somebody that was going to be his kind of partner, his best friend going forwards. I think he loved the guys in Sabbath. They were all mates. They all came from the same streets. They all had the same kind of upbringing. They all looked after each other. They all knew each other. It meant a lot to them. I think that all of them well, probably hurt by the fact they split up in the first place. But I think Ozzy found friendship with Randy Rhoads, and Randy Rhoads obviously was a lot younger, but he was an absolute genius. Who knows what he may have done? And I think Ozzy struggled a bit after that, and whether that's when some of the troubles started for him on a personal level, I don't know. I think Sharon came along and really helped him, and as I said at the start of this video, I know there was a lot of people who don't always have kind words to say for Sharon, but she loved him, and he absolutely loved and adored her as well. And they did a great thing doing this gig that we've all witnessed, and what a way for Ozzy to go out, really. But Ozzy had so much new music in him, so many guitarists, Zakk Wylde, J.K. Lee, and I'm thinking of No More Tears was a great one. There's album after album. It's just so, there's so many things. And I guess the other thing about what Ozzy's done, and this is why, as I said at the beginning, this is for all of you, and I very much like all of you to say in the comments what Ozzy meant to you and how you're feeling. And for the longer ones, I'll stick them on the website. I'll put them on the website so it's somewhere where people can go and see over time what this great artist meant to us. A fantastic frontman, completely unique, and what a voice, a unique voice, like no one else. Can you imagine a voice like Ozzy getting through a program like The Voice now? It just wouldn't, would it? A unique sound. And think about the ballads, She's Gone, Changes, Solitude, Mama, I'm Coming Home. There's so many, isn't there? And how well he sang. The expression he put in, because some of the lyrics are full of angst and are full of pain and soul. And I think Ozzy was able to reflect that. He was able to reflect emotion in a very clear way, almost using his voice as an instrument in many ways. And then, of course, we have the legacy. Because I was going to say, I put down here being part of something. Because that's the other thing, Black Sabbath kind of pulled together a genre. There were lots of bands, that helped pour little ingredients into this genre that we call heavy metal. But in Black Sabbath and Ozzy, there was lots of light and shade, lots of beautiful melodies, and there are lots of different styles all poured into this music. But it is, I think, making you feel part of something. That's you're an outsider, because it's always, isn't it? It's the guy with the dark black hair and the denim jacket with all the patches on up the corner that no one seems to talk to. But actually, the reality is, lots of people talk to you, because wherever you went, especially in Birmingham, there were pubs and clubs where people like that hung out and talked about Sabbath, and you could actually bump into Ozzy or Tony Iommi in a shop or in a bar. They were accessible. People knew them, and they were part of the fabric of the band of the city rather. But I think that's the other thing that I think that pulls this together. It's not like, I don't want to belittle any other musician or artist that passes away at all. But there's something about this that is very different. I remember reading, someone had said, I think, when will classic rock as a movement, the phrase that came about in the late 90s really, when will that kind of disappear? And I think someone said, when Ozzy goes. And I don't know about that, but I understand the sentiment that Ozzy is probably sits right at the top of when you think of classic rock and that whole stark rock music coming out of the 60s and ruling the 70s and moving on through the decades. Sabbath and Ozzy as a personality sits right at the top of that, I feel. And I think a lot of people probably felt connected to Ozzy's songs and how they made them feel on a very different level. And the way when you went to see Ozzy Osbourne, whether it was with Sabbath or a solo, how he made you feel, how he made you feel part of a larger community, part of something. And as I said, he's human. He'd made errors in his life, so I'm not trying to say he was a perfect human being. He wasn't, but none of us are. But he loved his fans, as I said. And if I had to pick a song, when I thought about doing this, I was going to list half a dozen tracks that I was going to say would be really good ones to play. But you can do that in the comments if you want to. But I'm only going to mention one song. And I think for me, the way I feel at the moment doing this is the song that I'll play, and you can actually watch this song as a video as well. And the video is incredibly moving. And probably I haven't watched it this side of doing this video. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have been able to do this video. But that song is from the album Ordinary Man. And the song is Ordinary Man. It's obviously Ozzy going through the streets of Birmingham, reliving his life, and he said he doesn't want to die. An ordinary man. And he hasn't. So, as I said at the start, I know this is really difficult for lots of people, and it'll be in newspapers and they'll try and write a few column inches and think, well, that's that ticked off, that's that done. But for many of you watching this, it's far more than that, isn't it? So pick your favourite song. Just spend some time being gentle with yourself. Write down how you feel. Play the music and keep playing it. And Ozzy will live on. The stories might fade. The music will never, ever fade. Thank you for watching. Take care, all of you. Remember, music is the healer and the doctor. And I'll talk to you all very, very soon.